apply for the same position, that the decision was not based on my dreads, my skin tone, my high cheekbones, my unattended soul seat. Racial inequity speaks to me deeply, cause that's the seed they planted in me when they tease me and dangle in my face new businesses, new condos that's coming pronto, but still so much homelessness though. Now we rise with change in our minds, we organize and build power through our minds. We mentally envision first, and physically we'll see that having racial equity will empower DC. It's never been a peaceful revolution. Knowing thyself is the solution. Water me down says confusion. No more statistics, facts are proven. Everything though comes to one conclusion. Ending the process of misusing. Ending believing in illusion. For a minute, let's change with the truism. Let's rebel for a minute. Hey, prevail for a minute. Be bold for a minute. Let the truth be told for a minute. Time to disrupt for a minute. Not all about money for a minute. But be willing for a minute. To do right by the people for a minute. Time to go hard for a minute. Time to ride for a minute. Time to slide for a minute. Time to know for a minute. Know we are gods for a minute. We in charge for a minute. We've been here for a minute. We've been ready for a minute. Ready to heal for a minute. Ready to build for a minute. To empower for a minute. To go get it for a minute. Let's pull it together for a minute. By sticking together for a minute. Doing it together for a minute. By using our minds for a minute.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you're doing well. As folks join us, I just want to welcome you. My name is Parisa Norouzi. I'm the director of Empower DC. And we are excited to join together today to recap some of our efforts over the last 4 years around the DC Comprehensive Plan, which was finalized and passed by the City Council last month. And we're going to just do a high-level analysis of what our impact was on the comp plan. Then we're going to hear about a couple of current campaigns. One, there is a group of residents around the city who have filed a suit to challenge the impact of the future land use map changes. We're going to hear from a couple of the plaintiffs of that case. And we're also going to hear from members of the Wardman Strategy Task Force, which is working very hard to make sure that there's an option for the Marriott Wardman, former Marriott, to be transformed to affordable housing. So I want to, again, thank you. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. And you know, what I'm going to present to you in my presentation is by no means everything. Of course, you know, the document, as you guys know, the comprehensive plan turned out to be close to a 1,500-page document. It's a 20-year guiding plan for development in the city. We focused mostly on the land use and housing elements of the plan. And so my report is largely based on changes to those elements. We will open up the room for other folks to share analysis if there was specific things you were looking at in the comp plan or other chapters you want to call attention to. There will be a chance to do that. And we're going to try to keep this meeting today to 90 minutes, just to acknowledge the fact that I'm sure everybody's zoomed out and has other things they might want to do today. So I'm going to get into it. Let's see here. So first, I'm just going to touch for 1 second on the work of the Grassroots Planning Coalition and how we got to the impact that we were able to have. Talk about some of the wins and losses from at least our perspective or my perspective, and then talk about some next steps in the implementation and also next steps for our coalition. As a refresher, this work has been led by the DC Grassroots Planning Coalition. We are guided by a steering committee. We've been meeting monthly as a citywide body since April of 2017, featuring different trainings and case studies. We've had a number of government representatives join us, including Chairman Mendelson on a few occasions. A couple years back, we did study circles in each of the planning areas in the city. We supported or ourselves contributed to dozens of amendments that were submitted, oral and written testimonies. We organized dozens of meetings with council members and their staff. And of course, most recently drafted very specific amendments. I think it was like 50 pages of amendments. Did a lot of work to try to get our messaging out there. And at the end of the day, had over 30 groups endorse our priorities. And we've engaged over 1,200 residents from all 8 wards in this work. I want to give you a moment, if you could, in the chat, just note any of those activities you were part of. If you testified, please write testified. If you attended the meetings, monthly meetings, please write attended meetings. If you attended any meetings with the council members, if there's something else that you'd like to note, I want to just acknowledge that this has been a group effort. It's been a lot of work. This is one of those instances where we had no control over the timeline. I think when we started in 2017, we weren't necessarily expecting it to be 4 years before we saw the passage of the comp plan. But I want to, celebrate all of our members, all of your hard work, the fact that people took interest in this to begin with, which is sort of like, one of these topics that not everybody in the city has been aware of or involved in. The fact that you've participated faithfully on a regular basis, even on sunny Saturday afternoons, the fact that we work together to try to, really understand stuff that is new to most of us, zoning, land use. I think very few in our group are land use attorneys, for instance, and for the most part, this world has been closed to regular people, this world of really looking at land use law, land use policy. So I do want to thank you for putting in the chat some of the ways that you all have been involved. I want to thank you for that, and I hope you feel good. Obviously, we don't, we don't get to celebrate a 100% victory. Everything we ever wanted is in the comp plan now. However, I do think we made a significant difference, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. If you remember 2017, it was a bit of a different time. When the mayor initially proposed her amendments to the comp plan, it was extremely clear, and she stated this really in the media, that her primary objectives were to stop or limit appeals, resident-led appeals, which is residents actually exercising their legal rights to appeal zoning decisions. And she also wanted to make way to build more. The ways that she was going about that, primarily weakening language throughout the comp plan, changing a lot of the directives in the comp plan that said you shall do this or ensure this to a should, so weakening a lot of language with the thought that would mean that the courts would not be able to rule in favor of appeals. It doesn't mean that you can't appeal, but it means that the courts would not be able to rule in favor because the directive would be so weak. So that was one of her big initiatives. The other one was really making way for a lot of new development through changing the future land use map and allowing greater density in areas throughout the city. I think at the end of the day, most of her attempts on the first of weakening language has been reversed. I think from what I saw throughout the plan, and I think we have to give credit to Phil Mendelson on this. I think that he agreed that weakening the language was not the right thing to do. And so from what I saw, and there may be some places that the language was not a reverse, but in most of the places that I saw where the mayor had weakened language to change a shall to a should, it was reversed. On the other hand, the FLUM changes were largely left intact. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I think there may be some people on the call today who are in communities that were impacted by FLUM changes, future land use map changes, with one exception as far as I know, which is the Ivy City community. I think most of the future land use map changes did proceed. And so we do have some concerns, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like for how development decisions will be made. Also, just going back, think about this. When we had that hearing on the framework element, which is the first chapter, that was what I think it was March, or I forget the month. I think it was March 2018, right? If you remember, that was a very well attended hearing. I think our side was perceived to be a larger presence than the other side, with the other side being folks that were saying comp plan is perfect, pass it as is, move forward, build more, everything's great, we just need to build more. And I think because we were able to represent another voice there that seriously questioned who was going to benefit from all this development, we prevented this plan from sort of sailing through and moving through quickly. And I think because of that, then of course you see how times changed. Of course, now we are in the midst of the pandemic. We've experienced the murder of George Floyd. There's a huge resurgence of protest culture. There's also a greater awareness throughout city government of racial equity. And there's the passage of the REACH Act and the creation of the Council Office on Racial Equity. We started messaging that the comp plan is racist because of it will continue to exacerbate the racial inequity in the city. And actually the Council Office on Racial Equity, when it released its racial equity impact assessment of the comp plan, it agreed. And had we not, and I think that gave us a huge boost, especially in these last few months. So had we not had this plan been passed in 2018 or 2019, I don't know that the racial equity focus would have been in the plan at all. If you remember the mayor's initial proposal, it had no reference to racial equity at all. And now it is a guiding theme throughout the plan. The other thing that the mayor's initial proposal had no reference to is deeply affordable housing. We kept raising the issue, of course, that affordable housing is kind of a meaningless term in the city because we apply that to housing that's for high income people, 80% AMI. And so we pushed for housing affordability to be defined at a more meaningful level, lower levels of lower income levels. And at the end of the day, a new concept was introduced to the comp plan that was not in there at all before. It was called deeply affordable housing. And we'll talk a little bit more about it. It's not everything we wanted, but it is something that was not existing at all in the mayor's draft. It just said affordable housing. And now in many places throughout the plan, it actually specifies deeply affordable housing as the priority. And if you have questions, if you don't mind putting them in the chat, then when I have a minute to pause, we can go through some of those. So I just want to talk about some of these key things. Racial equity, in a nutshell, some of the ways that this was advanced, it was added as a guiding principle to the framework element back in 2018. That was sort of when we got this ball rolling. The amended plan it mentions racial equity and equitable development in dozens of places throughout the policies and actions and in the narrative, basically saying that you have to add the equity analysis in many different occasions. But one of the things that I think is hopefully going to be impactful, and we'll really have to watchdog this, is the fact that it requires the Office of Planning and the Zoning Commission to use a racial equity lens in its work. And one of the first things that we did was push back and say, okay, well, what is a racial equity lens? You didn't define that in the comp plan. So what is that? And so they actually did add an amendment that defines it. And I'll show you that in a second. But here's some of the language now in the comp plan that talks about developing racial equity tools having training to use a racial equity lens as part of the development review process in the preparation of plans, zoning code updates, capital improvement program updates, etc. And just to think that this has never been a requirement before. So what we will see with our persistent involvement is, what does this mean to the Zoning Commission and the Office of Planning? And do we have to, I'm sure we will have to push back and make sure that they do this in a meaningful way. In terms of how they defined racial equity lens, they did add this section after we, and I think some of the council members pushed back saying we need to define this further. So it does include these bullets now to identify and consider past and current systemic racial inequities, identify who benefits or is burdened from a decision, disaggregate data by race, and evaluate the program in terms of whether it will eliminate racial inequity or promote equitable development outcomes. So again, this is just a a starting point, and we'll have to really watch and see how this is implemented by the Zoning Commission and the Office of Planning. I think one of the first times we're going to get to see this is in the Berry Farm case. The Office of Planning has applied for a map amendment for Berry Farm, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And there will be a hearing. It's been pushed back to July 1st. And the Zoning Commission specifically told the Office of Planning to update their report to reflect these new comprehensive plan policies. So we'll see how they start talking about this with that report. In terms of low-income housing, some of you will remember there was a really good discussion in the council about the fact that affordable housing was being defined up to 80% of the area median income. Yet the median income for a Black family in DC is closer to 40% of the area median income. And particularly Janice Lewis George was working to try to define affordable housing closer to what is affordable for the average Black family in the city. At the end of the day, there was a new priority added for this deeply affordable housing, which was defined in the comp plan as housing up to 40% of the area median income. Some of us in the world of, working in public housing, et cetera, have defined deeply affordable housing as up to 30% of the area median income. So this does actually go beyond what we would have normally wanted to say. Like, in fact, we would have, preferred it to say 30. However, I had been in touch with an office that told me that there was an interest on the chairman's part, is my understanding, to make it 60%. So I'm very glad that it did not turn out to be 60% of the area median income. And, again, this will be something that it's a little unclear how impactful this will be. It's now added to dozens of policies where it's talking about renovation or development. It says with a focus and emphasis on deeply affordable housing. However, the production targets did not change. So that was something we were concerned about. The mayor has stated a goal of building 36,000 new housing units. I think it's by 2025. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And they've said that 12,000 of that 36,000 will be so-called affordable. And then in the comp plan, there's a chart that shows the production target for how much would be at different levels. Only 40% of the 12,000 is for housing up to 30% AMI. 30% of it is for housing from 30 to 60, and another 30% from 60 to 80. That 60 to 80, we had really wanted to eliminate. We really believe that the 60 to 80 doesn't need the subsidy. Plus, it's been over subsidized by the city over the last 20 years. The city has put more affordable housing money into that category and neglected the lower income. And so for these next 5 years, particularly until the comp plan is rewritten, we really felt like the emphasis needs to be on the 30%. So because the production targets are not changed, again, that's disappointing, and we'll see what impact that has on the actual decisions that are made. There is one thing I wanted to point out. This report, this section was in the comp plan. However, it's been strengthened and made more robust and added to, and it's now calling for a very detailed annual state of the district housing report. It also calls for the creation of a housing oversight board composed of residents representing different incomes and household types, as well as for-profit, nonprofit developers and others. And so I think this is one of those ideas that's good, but it doesn't mean anything if nobody does it, right? So this is one of the things that I think I'd like to see us push for implementation. I'd love to see a housing oversight board with representatives from, every kind of housing, right? Public housing, Section 8 housing, rent control housing, that's helping to review this data and put together this report. In terms of anti-displacement, it was another one of our core priorities. There are a couple of good new provisions in the comp plan. There is a provision now that calls for the development of an anti-displacement strategy, which I'll show you in a minute. There is some stronger language pertaining to public housing redevelopment and building first, which is something that the city has actually never done. It's always been a so-called principle of the New Communities Initiative, but they never did it. So they've always displaced public housing residents. And it also calls for an anti-displacement pilot project in Ward 8. And this would be where they would identify a place to put additional resources for tenant organizing, tenant support to prevent displacement. And here's the piece on the anti-displacement strategy. Initially, I think that this was a new policy in the comp plan. I think it came from the chairman's office. However, it was initially a tracking displacement. And so we were able to get this to be much more robust and to actually call for the creation of a district-wide anti-displacement strategy. Again, this will be something that is meaningless if not implemented. So this is something I actually testified about at the Office of Planning budget hearing, just to put it on the record and say, well, this is something we really want to see happen. But I think with a lot of these, we'll need to work with council members to get policy, to get legislation introduced that reflects these, that allows it to have more detail, who's responsible, et cetera, and to get it funded. And then in terms of the redevelopment of public housing, Brianna Doe's office really took the lead on amendments to this section 510.4. This section basically, and this is an excerpt of it, it basically lays out some of the steps that they should take if they're redeveloping affordable housing or public housing. And I think the language now is stronger when it comes to one-for-one replacement as well as build first. And then the policy that follows it, this 506.9 says redevelopment of public housing must achieve all applicable strategies listed in 510.4. 510.4 says when redeveloping the property, build replacement affordable units first, prior to any offsite physical relocation. So that is something that we're hoping will have an impact moving forward. Again, these things, the way that the comp plan is, developers and the city will cherry pick which policies they want to highlight when they're doing something, right? So they'll say, oh, well, this, we can displace people here because it complies with our other policies of making sure we build more housing. And we may have to be the ones to bring this up and say, well, no, actually, this is because remember, at the end of the day, the zoning commission is not to approve development that is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. So this is where a lot of the power of the plan comes in, is the zoning commission has as its mandate that it's supposed to not be inconsistent with this. And I'm going to open it up in a minute for others to add anything that I miss. I'm just doing a high level. One of the things that we also pushed for was community-led equitable development. This is an area that we didn't get as much traction. We really hoped to get more language that would say, for instance, that public housing residents and low-income residents should be a partner, an equity partner in development. That we should, one idea was to create a community development fund that would be supporting community-led equitable development projects with funding, with financing, both from the very front end, planning, development. We recognize that, you know, we still haven't changed the paradigm of how we do development in the city. We're still largely subsidizing for-profit developers to include a couple units of affordable housing in big market rate developments. We're not doing community economic development. We're not changing who has power, who has control, who has ownership, and we're not changing the economic conditions of our lowest income residents as a result. And that's a missed opportunity, especially when we talk about, you know, public housing redevelopment. The other thing that, you know, in terms of community-led development, FLUM changes, in many cases, the changes to the future land use map did not reflect community planning. In a lot of cases, they reflected development projects. So because they're changing the map before they do the planning, that's also an example of not doing community-led equitable development. There was a couple of examples where we did get some gains, and I'll share that. In Ivy City, we were able to get the FLUM changes reversed. There was a proposal to change the future land use map for the Cromell School, as well as for 2 properties next to it, to allow moderate density. I always forget which one is the higher one. I think it's the moderate density housing. And the reason why it was opposed by the community is because they have not had the opportunity to do any small area planning. There's been a lot of gentrification and displacement. And at the end of the day, the priority for Cromell School in particular was not housing. It was recreation and green space. Because we were able to get that reversed, it helped us then get the mayor to reverse her plans for that site, and subsequently fund in the budget the renovation of Cromell School as a community center, which is huge because we've been working on that. Jim Schulman knows we've been working on that over 20 years. So this is again where it connects between, you know, what the map said in the comp plan and what, you know, it helped boost the community's demand that we were able to get that, make it basically so that they couldn't do the development plan, that they couldn't do the development deal that they wanted to do at Cromell because the land use map wasn't allowing it. The other thing is it's now part of what's called a future planning area, which says that there has to be some small area planning before the land use map changes can happen in the next comp plan. And so for me, this represents the first time after generations of divestment, decades of gentrification, that the process is now in the hands of the community. Do some planning and figure out what the vision is for the future. And hopefully it kind of slows down some of that displacement pressure from these big new housing developments while the community has a chance to do that. The other place that we got a little bit, we hope, of a reprieve is for Berry Farm. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get them to reject the FLUM change for Berry Farm. And the reason why we wouldn't want the FLUM change is not because we don't want them to build, it's because we want there to be a process. We want there to be PUD hearings, you know, planned unit development hearings at the zoning commission, so that the residents would have an opportunity to negotiate and hold the developers accountable at each stage. What we were able to get is some strengthened language in this policy that speaks to the Berry Farm redevelopment. It talks about documenting site development and community agreements. We had asked for binding and enforceable agreements that 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 represent the residents' right to return, that represent the commitments around replacing the public housing units and creating home ownership opportunities for returning residents, et cetera. They wouldn't give us the words binding and enforceable, but they do say that these agreements need to be documented. And then there's this new paragraph here talking about respecting the self-governance and leadership of the tenants, which is new for the comp plan. There's never been something that really talks about that. So we're hoping that, this is also something we can use to promote the role of the residents. And so just briefly, I'm going to talk about some next steps, and I'm going to open the floor. And I see that there was some comments in the chat. We definitely want to track and watchdog the implementation of the plan policies that we care most about. And these are not all of them by far, but just a couple of examples I raised today. The Office of Planning and the Zoning Commission use of the racial equity lens. That's something that we really need to look at closely. This build first and one-for-one replacement language that I went over, the Ivy City and Berry Farm policies. And I'd love for you all to add to that list other plan policies that you really want to track the implementation of. And part of that, we also need to work with council offices to draft and introduce policies that build on these comp plan ideas. In some cases, we will need that in order for them to be funded or implemented. So ideas like the Anti-Displacement Strategy and the pilot project in Ward 8 and the Community-Led Development Fund, these are things that we even in our initial meetings with council offices talked about doing some kind of policy around. We also need to change the culture of the city with regard to the comp plan. In the past, it's just something that, you do it and you put it on a shelf, and pretty much the Zoning Commission is the only one who might pay attention to it. We think that it needs to be incorporated into the council oversight of DC agencies. So during oversight hearings, the council members should be asking the agency, where do they stand on these comp plan provisions? And then also into budget advocacy, especially to the extent if the comp plan is calling for small area planning, that has to be budgeted, right? If it's calling for creation of a report, or even if it's calling for affordable housing that needs to have subsidy, all of that has to be funded to be real. We want to continue to grow the DC Grassroots Planning Coalition. By no means is our work done. I mean, we definitely started around the comp plan, but that's just the beginning. So we want to ultimately, continue to work around racially equitable, community-led development in all wards of the city. Part of that, of this group, recruiting new steering committee members, looking at our structure and our membership structure, and building more systems for ward level involvement. And on the ward level, really looking at things like, how can we train and support residents across the city to be meaningfully engaged in small area planning, hearings around surplus properties and the use and treatment of surplus land, zoning hearings. Some ANCs have development committees working proactively around protecting at-risk public and affordable housing, or looking at the impact of some of these FLUM changes on developments and communities. So now I want to open the floor, and first I want to invite Chris to share one other immediate next step related to comp plan. Chris Otten, are you on here now? Let's see. I'm looking for you. There you are. Okay. Go ahead, Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So we're talking about an immediate next step now that the city council has passed it. And we're going to go into this a little bit later with the lawsuit. But the council has the Office on Racial Equity, which I think was covered a little bit earlier, talking about how they did an analysis of the comp plan. And it's very important you all get a chance to read that report, It's a very thorough report, but it says even despite the changes that the council made to the mayor's changes to the plan, um, even despite those changes by the council, this comp plan in its last 5 years of a 20-year cycle will perpetuate what we've seen over the last 15 years, which is status quo, racial inequity, and displacement. And so what I want to let folks know is the timing of this. I saw in the chat, there's a question about when does this become law? When does this go to the mayor for her signature? When does it go to Congress? There's actually a first intervening step here that's unusual to the comp plan, and that is it has to go to the National Capital Planning Commission, which is this federal oversight board that looks at projects regionally and in DC, and has to approve them before they go forward because it's affecting federal interests here in the district. And so this federal body has representation from DC, Virginia, Maryland on it, and they're going to be taking up this comp plan on July 1st. And there's a staff report that's due out at the end of this month. And just as an action item, and I'll put in the chat, and I think it's something that we'll follow up with as well in terms of an email, but basically the point is that here's another juncture for us to say, hello, the core report came out, the comp plan is still racist. Can a federal body actually pass a project that is on its face still going to promote racial inequity and disparities and displacement? We don't think they can, but we're encouraging people to write. I'll put in the chat right now who to write to, and then we'll follow up afterwards with a letter. But I can show you what I had written to them already. If I can share my screen, let's see. Parisa, do you mind if I share something real quick? But basically, we have now an opportunity to write to the staff at at the where is it? I'm not seeing it as an option. All right, where?
I'm sorry, I was just.
Go ahead. I don't see it
I
as an
think I
option.
have, you're saying your document, or you don't see how to, this?
Oh, there it is. Yeah, so writing to the National Capital Planning Commission. It's yeah. I guess Parisa, is that you showing this?
Yeah, I'll show it.
All righty. Well, anyway, it's just a letter to them, just saying, hey, there's this core report. It says the comp plan is racist, and it's not doing enough. The local officials didn't do enough about it. So, as a federal body, will you do something? Will you send it back to the council and say, let's get this done right? I mean, this is the harm that's been perpetuated over the last 15 years needs to be addressed. And so we have just some points in here from the core report, and you can see these 3 bullet points. And this is right out of the report. Despite the plan's commitment to eliminating racial inequities, the document before us still perpetuates the status quo. If the district's goal is to end racial inequities, CORE believes the district should set guidance to prevent and eliminate displacement rather than minimize it. I mean, 40,000 Black folks displaced between 2000 and 2010. We're about to see the census numbers between 2010 and 2020. This is not even minimizing it. And then the last point I pulled out for the letter is how rezoning requests, which are going to come down the pipeline after this plan, may adversely or positively impact communities of color would be unknown and subject to chance under these current policies and regulations. So we want to write to the NCPC before they put out their staff report. And I put the email contacts in the chat room. I think it's basic on its face what you're asking. You can write to them today, or you can wait and we'll send out an email sample letter after the meeting so that you can copy and paste. But the more we get folks writing to them, the more we might have a chance for the federal agency here to send it back to local officials and say, fix what's clearly an incomplete plan that doesn't take into account the harm that's been perpetuated over the last 15 years. Hope that makes sense.
Okay, Chris, and I know you'll talk a little bit later about the lawsuit that some folks are doing, so we'll leave it at that. But I want to ask, is there anybody else who wants to raise their hand and possibly give some additional analysis or thoughts on the plan as passed? Was there anybody else that steering committee or otherwise? I'm looking for either a hand raise or something in the chat of somebody who wants to say something.
This is Chris Williams. And thank you for the opportunity to speak, Parissa. I am part of the steering committee, and I'd like to thank Parissa for her leadership on behalf of the committee and all the hard work that you do for the coalition, as well as for Empower DC. We could not have done it without your help. We, with the coalition's help and many partners around the city, made a lot of meaningful gains from the initial proposal that the mayor put forward. But as Chris just mentioned, we have ongoing concerns that the planning, as the law requires, still did not go far enough. And mind you, the city has been heavily investing, when we look at public land, when we look at public subsidies, has been heavily investing in upper incomes and considering that to be affordable for the last 20 years. And it is our belief that the plan simply doesn't go far enough. And we made a number of proposals. Again, many were accepted, many were not. And so we'd like to know what the district is going to do going forward to really address these salient issues of racial injustice and, I would say, fair housing violations that it has not to date really dealt with. So those would be my remarks. Thank you, Parissa.
Thanks, Chris. And anybody else? And we have a few more minutes. Is there anybody else that wants to highlight something that you saw that you think is positive or negative? Talk about the politics involved. Anything? Zachary, you want to go ahead? I see your hand raised.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I was writing in the chat, but I'll just say briefly here that I've noticed, that Washington Post runs a lot of press about Mayor Bowser's quote unquote efforts to build affordable housing. And, I know that those headlines, or I wonder if those headlines are part of the sort of PR campaign to, take attention away from the long range or the slower moving disaster of like a 20-year comp plan having the implications that it does, even if it's not direct. I wonder what opportunities there are to have those held up next to each other and say that, it's one thing to put up a long overdue public housing project, or to try to say that you tried to, versus to, while also doing this running roughshod over major, infrastructure planning that benefits, the wealthy. So that was just on my mind.
Thank you, Zachary. Yeah, the mayor is an expert at this PR spin. She has invested more money in the Housing Trust Fund, for instance, but that is the same tool that we've been using this whole time, that is largely, again, investing in for-profit developers with a small percentage of affordable housing, rather than looking at the different innovative approaches to community-led development. Nick, and somebody mentioned it in the chat, what was the name? Tom mentioned that there was a successful effort to get the mention of social housing in the comp plan. So there's just a policy that talks about looking at alternative strategies, and the mention of social housing is in there, and that in and of itself, is something, again, that to be celebrated and to build upon. So yeah, we do need to look at other approaches and be wary of the PR machine. Miss Rita, would you like to unmute and say something?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
For the share, I wasn't here for the earlier part of the conversation, so I apologize if I have any duplication. But I feel like this is a case of environmental because as a holistic practitioner, I'm looking at the wider view of the impact of the increased development in the city. And I just don't see the level of evaluation and study for the impact on the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual dimensions of our city. I feel like just the increased level of density, increased levels of traffic, vehicles, all of the dust, the asbestos that flies in, and has created externalized cost that the taxpayer ends up having that burden because people are saying, oh, gee, we're sicker, we don't have our cognitive skills at the level that we expected, and don't tie it into all those externalized costs of these developers. And in the end, don't even have access to any studies that they claim to have. So I feel like I just wanted to just talk about the impact studies that are claimed to have been made, and then we don't ever see. And also just the accumulation, the bioaccumulated stress and toxins that are a result of all of this overdevelopment, and it's just the kind of planning that doesn't seem to have any foresight, any.
I'm gonna
at the is
okay, Miss Rita, I'm gonna cut you off there just because you're
real substance to the planning. Okay, thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. We heard most of what you were saying. You were breaking up just a little bit, but we just have a couple more minutes on this section, so I do want to allow Tom and Ann to speak briefly. Tom, you want to go ahead and unmute?
Yeah, very quickly, just wanted to say that with regard to social housing, that there were 7 places in the comp plan where it would have been nice for us to have been able to get social housing mentioned. We were maybe lucky to get the 1 and happy to get that. And I think it's real important that we have maybe 3 different projects that it will be trial basis, pilot programs, where we need for people to see that it works. And so somehow we can use everybody, we can use all the help we can get to try to get at least 3 projects going in DC.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And Ann, go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, I think we have some help maybe. The HUD secretary has announced that she seriously intends to enforce the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which requires localities to take affirmative action to end housing segregation and the related ills. And that seems to me something that we should bring up to the National Capital, Regional, and anybody else who will listen, that this does not do that.
Thank you. Yeah, these are all great areas for us in terms of follow-up and next steps, right? I mean, the comp plan is really just the beginning, and I think it gave us a great wide view of the many things that need to be addressed. But reforming the way we do planning, of course, our whole affordable housing development, paradigm and everything else. I'm going to put in the chat a survey. If you guys wouldn't mind just taking a couple minutes and filling this out when you have a moment. It's basically getting a little bit more feedback from you about your participation with the Grassroots Planning Coalition, some of the things you'd like to see next be a focus, and ways that you might want to be involved. As you're doing that, I'm going to ask Chris Otten if he would like to start. We're going to hear from, there are some residents who have initiated a lawsuit, and some of them, I think some of the plaintiffs are on the call today. I think David Belt and some others. So Chris Otten, did you want to get this portion started and then have some of the plaintiffs speak?
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we're going to turn it, we're going to try to keep this quick, but I was chosen of the steering committee to be kind of the bearer of some of the bad news that happened with this plan. And I think that's okay, because if anybody knows me, bad news does not diminish my dissent. And in fact, it might propel it. And so what we started looking at, and there's a group of lawyers involved and people from around the city, is like, well, what really happened here? And now that this plan has been passed, what can happen for the areas of the city where planning has not happened per the law, right? And what does that mean? Well, there are some areas of the city, and I've seen this in some of the chat privately to me, is like, well, if the lawsuit works, or we ask them to send it back, will it stop what's already happening with real planning? And no, that's not the case. We're seeing that with Barry Farms and with, well, I don't know if there's real planning there yet, but maybe we'll get there. But Ivy City, I mean, there's places like Fletcher Johnson in Ward 7 where people are happy about the planning process. They got actually OP to do and DEMPID to do an actual planning process. So none of what we're about to talk about will stop that or eliminate that, because they're fulfilling the law. They're actually doing planning. And so none of this will affect that. I just want to make that clear. And I'm going to put in the chat, now that the plan is passed and we've heard some of the problems here, what are the remedies? Well, let me just go into first what the biggest problem is. The biggest loss we had was, and I don't know if any can, am I able to switch?
You muted yourself, Chris.
Am I muted or am I unmuted now? Okay,
Now
I think
you're
I'm
unmuted.
unmuted. My bad. All right. I want to make sure, can everybody see this map on the
Yes,
screen?
we can see
Okay,
it.
thank you. So this is the future land use map, and this is where we saw our greatest loss, because this is the map that allows the city to develop or sets the future projections for development in the city. And I'm just going to scroll this little slider here to show you what this means for the whole city. And now, folks, we try to protest such changes in our communities. Sometimes we won. Most of this has held in what passed a few weeks ago by the council. So this is the mayor's proposal. There were some additional additions to this map change by Councilmember Brianne Nadeau in Ward 1 and Mary Chase. So those won't show up on this map, but I'm going to scroll this just to show you the breadth of changes. And you'll see the changes are annotated in, are highlighted in black. and we could scroll in, but you could see there's significant upzoning happening across the city. Now, most of this map got passed by the council. What does that mean? It's 200 million square feet. The city is unlocking. The city council is telling the zoning commission, you now have the power to unlock 200 million square feet of land and air rights to be developed as a matter of right, largely. So why is that a problem? Well, there was no planning impacts done with this type of development. We're talking about tens of thousands of new residents that will pour into this much more new development, right? It was developer driven, very much spot zoning, where the developers wanted things to happen is where this map changed. Wasn't really community driven. And there was no planning impact studies done to see who might be affected, who might be harmed by this development. Going back to the core report, what does planning mean? Well, it means taking into account existing neighborhoods and residents before you make major changes like this. So I just wanted to show everybody, this is like the big thing we lost. Because now we're going to start seeing the zoning commission get a ton of applications from all these landowners, private developers, to upzone their property. And it's not something we can really fight very much. Although some of the language that Parisa talked about earlier that we want in the plan, we could bring to these hearings. And that's a key thing in terms of next step, is keeping your eye on that zoning calendar and making sure when something's coming up in your community that you're ready to get your neighbors together to go into that hearing and take some of the language we want and say, hey, how is upzoning this land consistent with the language in the plan? Unfortunately, when this map changes like this, a lot of that community input is limited. You can have people come in and speak for 3 minutes, but there won't be parties, there won't be cross-examination, you won't be able to ask OP why they think this is a good idea. So all of that gets eliminated because of these map changes. Also eliminated is your appeal rights. So let's say you get heard, but the zoning commission blows you off and they don't care about displacement, they don't care about the environmental impacts. You don't have a remedy in court anymore because of these map changes. So because all of that is subsequent to these map changes, the planning on the front side of these map changes are very, very important. And not just important, they're required by the law. And so let me see if I can stop sharing that. And that's what I want to get into today. People have joined a lawsuit that we're going to pitch for folks to, it's still open to join. It's an opportunity for us to hold their feet to the fire. Besides going to the NCPC and asking them to do something, it's a chance for us to say, does the law matter or not? And so I think I shared the wrong screen. Hold on. Stop share. Let me reshare this. And then we're going to go into some of the folks who actually did join the lawsuit. All right, I don't know where it is, so I'm just gonna have to share this one. So what's the basis for the lawsuit? It's the law. Under DC Code 1-306.04, the mayor shall submit to the council a report accompanied by a proposed resolution on the progress made by the DC government in implementing the comp plan. And then they should have a public hearing on this report and all of this. Now, we've raised this to the council. We've raised this to council staff. So where are the progress reports? Where is you're asking us to change this plan. How are we supposed to know how to change the plan if we don't know how the plan's being implemented? They never did the progress reports. Number two, DC Code 1-306.04, proposed amendments to the plan, including each one of these places amended on the map, shall be accompanied by an environmental assessment of the proposed amendments. Do you all think that happened? If you said no, then you'd be right. There was a slapdash 5-page assessment that was no caption on it, no date. It was slapped on the end of the legislation sent to the council from the mayor. We don't know who wrote it. We don't know when it was written. And when you read it as the core report, not us. I mean, we could read it and make our own determinations, but the core report says it's incomplete, it's non-exhaustive, and doesn't consider real people who will be impacted by these changes. So that's not our study. That's the Council Office on Racial Equity. And then flowing from this underlying law are regulations. And the regulations talk about when you're making these amendments, following information shall be required. Okay, how is it currently addressed in the plan? The anticipated impacts on the geographic area. Proposed change will be in conformance with the policies in the plan, and demonstration of public support. And then for the various amendments to the map proposed by like Brianne Nadeau and Mary Che at the very last minute on the council dais during the vote, there's even a regulation about that. And it says the council considers and votes on the amendment package. Any new or significantly modified amendment that is generated during any of these readings would be required to be accompanied by a planning analysis. So do you think the high density upzoning on U Street proposed by Brianne Nadeau has a planning analysis with it? No. So this gives rise for us to say, well, then what is this about? Is it just about taking your pen and changing maps and gambling with the future of our communities, or is it about real planning? I mean, why is it called a comprehensive plan? Why do we have the Office of Planning? When you look at the American Institute of Certified Planners Code of Ethics, all of whom the planners have been trained under, it talks about ensuring impacts are minimized or eliminated. It talks about understanding the interrelated impacts of these types of decisions. And so, again, they did not pursue that. And we are centering this lawsuit that was filed on the day of the second vote on the evidence put forward by the core report that's dated April 19th. You can find it on the core website, dcracialequity.org. And I'll put that in the chat, right? Let's see if I can do that. Yeah, I'll do that later. I don't know how to do that right now, but basically the core report makes, like, it doesn't hold back. It says it fails to address racial equities. And later on, it even talks about, even after Mr. Mendelson's changes to the plan, because it came out after, this report came out after the staff changes to the plan by Mr. Mendelson, the chair. But basically, this is a good one. As introduced, the plan does not build on the goals laid out in the framework element to build capacity of the most marginalized communities to fully and substantially participate in decision-making processes. This goes exactly to the point Parisa was mentioning earlier about community-driven planning. So, if you have 5 or 10 people in a room who OP happen to pull together from the people they know in a community, and they are setting the standards by which the future of your community is going to live under, is that really fully and substantial participation? Probably not. Do you think any of this was translated, any of the plan notices or anything for our limited English speaking communities? Of course not. So this is like stuff we were raising up during this whole process, but the council just chose to ignore it, and we don't understand why. They did do some good things, as pointed out earlier, but they didn't do the planning we expect, and also by the law. Just one last point on the mayor's submitted environmental assessment. This is from the core report itself. It says the comp plan environmental assessment is incomplete and non-exhaustive. Based on the law, the mayor is required to submit an environmental assessment. However, the 5-page assessment does not provide any thorough assessment, evaluation, analysis of the data, project-based assessment, or a critical analysis. I mean, you can't get any more clearer. And yet that was what was required by law, a true environmental assessment. ANCs wrote to the council and to OP about this, and they got ignored, and so on and so forth. And so, so just to conclude, I think the law is clear. I think we all want planning to be done in the city that takes into account from these major changes. And that, if that actually were done, maybe we would get to contending with the harm that we've seen over the last 15 years. But instead they chose not to deal with it because it's too, what is it, too difficult? I don't know. Does it hurt the developer's bottom line? We don't know why the intent of it, but we do know the result. And that's why we have some folks here who are coming on, and we encourage others to join this case. But we have some folks who are on the line today. I think, is Victor Booth on the line with us today?
Good afternoon, Chris. Yes, I'm here.
You want to just go into, I wanted to give some of the plaintiffs who have joined the case, a couple minutes to explain kind of who you are, where you're at, and why you joined the case. What does it mean to you?
And let me just say, we were going to move on at 2:10. We'll go to 2:15. So just, try to keep that in mind. Okay.
Thanks, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Victor Booth. I'm a native of Washington. I live at 708 Parkside Place in Northeast Lily Ponds area. I was the former head of the condo association. And then in the early 2000s, we were approached by developers who were given permission to come to the community and reach out to us to get our input on the future development of all those vacant parcels at Parkside. They also approached the people in Kenilworth Gardens at that time, and we were charged with selecting one of those developers. That didn't happen. I got a call from Stan Jackson. I guess he was the deputy mayor at the time. He just said, hey, the city chose to go in a different direction. The impact of that is that we lost a lot of green space. I appeared before the zoning commission. We had Mike Cass as our attorneys. We asked for a traffic study. We demanded several things, but we never got it. But again, Stan said they went in a different direction. They got Bank of America and other people to come in, and they met with us, but they didn't include us. And to piggyback on what Chris is saying, if you're not at the table, then you're behind us on the menu. And we found ourselves on the menu. They put Cesar Chavez Charter School there with no recreation for those children. They put up a lot of multi-families now. So there's parking is an issue. Our health is at stake. So we've lost a lot and a lot of green space. It doesn't have the spirit, the soul, or it's pollution. It's just, I don't know what impact that's going to have on our infrastructure, but I've joined this lawsuit to say, hey, we need poor people at the table so that we're not continue to be on the menu. And thanks for listening.
Thank you, Victor. I also see David Belt on the line. David, do you have a couple things to say?
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Good.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I joined this lawsuit because I just want to be part of the fight against this administration, which is taking gentrification to another level. It's actually taking gentrification, which was supposedly a quieter, less destructive means of colonization, and this administration has taken it more back towards the roughshod colonization of the 19th, 18th century in this country. I live in Ward 7, right on Benning Road, across the street from the Benning Road Library, Marshall Heights. And as you all know, they're planning to run the streetcar through Benning Road, which would be the smallest road on the map, if you looked at the map, the old map for 37 miles, it would be the smallest road put on there. They were all meant to be 3-lane, 4-lane roads to accommodate the size of the streetcar. In order to accommodate the size of the streetcar, they plan to violate a law which they don't want to speak about. They don't want to tell, they're assuming no one knows this law, which is, I mentioned it in a meeting before, which is the Parking Act of 1870, which allowed gifted all homeowners with the excess land when they designed the streets. Originally, the streets were designed to be much wider than what they are. So they really didn't need that. They built the streets out, built the sidewalks and everything, and it was leftover land, which was actually green space. So they gifted that to each homeowner. That's to treat as their own property. It's like in that kind of, and this is unique to DC, kind of thing where it's your property, but you don't have to pay taxes on it, but you are required to maintain it in a certain way with certain rules. That gives most people their front yards or a large portion of their front yards. It was never meant to be violated, never has been in 150 years. As a matter of fact, our councilman, Vincent Gray of Ward 7, he learned about the law when DDOT enforced it when he wanted to build a fence around his house. When he first, planned to build a fence, they brought that law to attention. So it's always been enforced. And now for this section, what they want to do, it's because it's a Black neighborhood with primarily seniors, and they don't even know what's going on. They feel that they can just go roughshod, run that streetcar roughshod when it's 100% opposed down, by the residents. So that's what I'm fighting right now. I'm fighting for the residents because they want to violate this law, and it's going to have to be brought up at some point. That's
thank
amazing.
you.
I call that an extremely aggressive way of gentrification because they're ramrodding the streetcar to destroy this neighborhood where they later on want to come and they're going to change the zoning. They plan to change the zoning and upzone it and make it commercial, mixed commercial.
I'm happy to speak as well.
Okay, Chris, let's hear from Alan and then we'll add you in. Alan Sieber.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. All right. I live in Chevy Chase and I've lived here I'm in my 5th decade. And I have watched over time the city ignore our ANC, even when we, follow the statutory, the comment periods, et cetera. And so the big picture that is attached to this is we need the city to comply with the laws and the regulations that govern all of these different, kinds of things that they may want to attempt. That's their business if they want to attempt them. On the other hand, what they need to do is to address all of us in the manner in which the law specifies. And we just can't seem to get them to do that. Thus, this lawsuit is aimed directly at that outcome. So let's follow the rules. It's basically, a core tenet of this lawsuit. Let us respond to the ANCs in the manner that they're required to do. Second point about this, in my neighborhood on Upper Connecticut Avenue, there 3 lots were upflummed. Now, if everyone is very simply stated, upflumming is a change in the map that says that there is reason for someone to expect to be approved for a zoning change on that piece of property. Now, if you think about what I just said, if someone, if a law firm, as in this case I'm thinking about, these 3 parcels on Connecticut Avenue, a law firm says to the DC government, hey, you know what? We want, my clients would like to build something in these 3 lots. And so the city says, well, you know, that might be a good idea. So let's do this. Let's change the future land use map, the FLUM, and let's raise the caliber of the development that can occur in that place. Now let's think for just a moment. In our houses, you look straight up toward the sun and you are stopped at 40 feet. You're not allowed to build above that. We're talking about a commercial piece of property on, you know, one of the big avenues or anywhere. There's likewise a limit to how high you can build. Now, the rest of that belongs to the state, belongs to the king, right? And the king can grant this to somebody. And so what happened on Connecticut Avenue is the state, the king said, well, if it's not titled to somebody else, it belongs to me, the king, and I'm going to give it to these law firms' clients. Well, okay, except that's our property. This is a modern state. The king is us. So what they did was they granted something of, in fact, serious value, great value, that is additional floors, you know, beyond what might have been built before, what can now be built. And we're talking about serious money. So that has been
Alan,
granted to someone without compensation.
and planning.
In other words,
Thank you, Alan. Alan,
okay.
I'm sorry, we got to stop you here. I
Yeah.
really appreciate that the insights and glad you're part of it. Chris, did you want to close this out as one of the plaintiffs?
Yes, I'm happy to talk to this. And I want to preface my remarks by saying this, is that Southwest residents recently met with Phil Mendelson, who is the chair of the DC Council. And in that conversation, he said that about 10 years ago, when there was planning underway for the baseball stadium, that he had expressed to the council at the time concerns about the effect that the building of the stadium would have on affordability. In other words, he talked about the foresight that he had in terms of the negative impact on Southwest residents, particularly low income and Black residents. What is ironic is that 5 or 10 years forward is that we do not have the foresight. The city lacks the foresight to understand the impact of this major comprehensive plan that it has passed. They are calling for mixed-use development at LaFont Plaza, yet we know that they did not do any impact assessment to understand the impact that that would have. They are calling for Maryland Avenue, which is in Southwest, to be redeveloped, yet we do not have an understanding of the impact, particularly racial impact or impact on affordability that would have for Southwest. We know that the recent Cotton Annex building, which was a federal government building, which was sold to a developer who was pardoned during the Trump administration, has sought to give us very minimal affordability in a building that will be converted from office to residential. Yet we have the district seems to express no major concern that it doesn't really understand the impact. And we know from the Council on Racial Equity, they have said that there is a lack of adequate assessment of impact due to the comprehensive plan. We want more investigation, evaluation of this plan because the law requires it. And let's be straightforward. The consequences are a matter of life and death. We know that when neighborhoods are gentrified, that there are mental health and psychosocial effects. There are financial implications. We know even when people are displaced, that there are physical health and mental health implications. And I am not just speaking rhetoric here. There are studies that show out of New York that those who were displaced from a gentrifying neighborhood had greater rates of hospitalization due to mental health. We also know that those who were displaced from gentrifying neighborhoods actually have greater visits to the emergency room. So this is a great concern because, again, it is a matter of life and death, and the district did not do an adequate job, and they should have done an adequate job of assessing impact that they didn't do. And we really call upon Chairman Mendelson, as he said 10 years ago when he thought about the stadium, where is that foresight now, sir? We want that planning. How does this impact not just neighborhoods like mine, but the district as a whole for the next 10 years? Thank you.
Thank you to all of our speakers. Definitely appreciate you being involved, and we will make space to share updates. We're going to move into hearing from the Wardman Park strategy team, and I'm going to share a video as we go into that. Also want to note that I had promised you we would be done at 2:30, but we're probably going to go over. So I'm going to make sure we're done by 2:45. I hope folks will be able to stay until then. All right, so let's see.
Homeowners, this incredible tip is just for you. If you owe less than $331,760.
Had it teed up, but you know. All right, here we go.
In foreclosure, neighbors want to see it put to good use.
We saw this terrific opportunity in the Wardman Hotel to provide a great deal of housing, including family-sized units that are affordable.
Meg McGuire is part of the Wardman Hotel strategy team. They're asking the council to not dismiss their idea because of the potential costs.
This is a 16-acre site. It's got enormous potential. It can also provide classrooms for some of the overcrowded schools in the area, offices for social services, culinary training facilities, a small business incubator.
McGuire has lived in D.C. since the 1970s. The changing of the district over the years is concerning to she and some of her neighbors in Ward 3.
You know, this city has lost 40,000 Black residents. We are losing the very heart of our city.
Earlier this year, Councilman King and McDuffie asked the mayor for $140 million to acquire the building. As of now, the city has not made a bid on the property.
I think it's a once in a generation opportunity to build some significant housing that meets the needs of district residents who, you know, have really not had the opportunity to have affordable housing at a place that's unique like Wardman Park.
In May, Mayor Bowser announced a $400 million investment in a housing production trust fund. There are already a number of developments underway in Wards 4, 5, 7, and 8. McGuire says their group would like to see that expand to Ward 3.
The gentrification and displacement are very troubling, and we've got to plan for ways that people who have a history in this city can stay in this city. We've got to keep the cultural diversity of the city. Otherwise, really just becomes, you know, homogenized. I don't want to live like that.
McGuire says they also would like to see all of this green space in the area maintained. Now, just off Connecticut Avenue here, there's tons of public transportation options, which would make this a perfect place for a more inclusive DC. Reporting live in Northwest, Megan Rivers, WUSA 9.
Excellent piece, and I'm going to turn it to Nick Deladon to share a little bit more about this effort.
Thank you, Parisa. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to address the most effective and broad spread grassroots organizing team in the city that's had such an impact on the comp plan. Let me say that I am speaking as a member of the Wardman Hotel strategy team, and my colleague Deb will speak in just a minute. And where does it start? It starts with the mayor. The mayor, for all of her wonderful plans, has yet to produce the deeply affordable housing that the city needs. And when we look carefully at the plan, there would be no way for that to happen. So as much as she disparages our, may disparage our efforts, the Grassroots has come up with a plan to convert the bankrupt Wardman Hotel into deeply affordable housing. And that's our plan. So we're really excited. It's the most exciting idea in the city today, and it comes from the Grassroots. Let me say briefly that our architect envisions about 500 units that would be 3 and 4 bedroom apartments. At the present time, the mayor has been responsible for luxury efficiencies where you cannot raise families. They are empty, nobody wants them. And we need to address the needs of the city. Another wonderful thing about this project is that it is large enough with open spaces to accommodate job training opportunities in their kitchen and elsewhere. And there should be room for plenty of amenities for the community, daycare, sports events, theater, and whatnot. And it sits over a metro. What could be better than that? In addition to that, the structure is already built, and there's a lot of savings that are involved with that. So I'm going to just, because our objective is to have the city buy this. And we're fortunate that Council Member McDuffie has proposed $140 million for its purchase, which the mayor has brushed aside. But the game isn't over yet, and we still have plans. Deb, do you want to add to my comments?
Yeah, just real quickly, and Nick, thanks. And I want to echo your points. I mean, my God, what an incredible group of people. Sitting here has just been, wow. I'm practically, I think ready to cry at the enormous, just incredible group of people and the support. And I'm really, really, really happy to be part of the Wardman Strategies group. I'm part of a group of about 3 other folks, and we've been doing community outreach. We've had some meetings with neighbors in one fell swoop. And we've also done some personal knocking on doors and talking with our neighbors. And I am very pleased to announce that in the Woodley Park area, and I live on Woodley Place, so we've been on Woodley Place, of course, Woodley Road, Cathedral, and across near the location of the hotel, on some of the streets, the numbered streets, 27th, 28th, 29th, et cetera, and talking to folks. And there is enormous support for converting the hotel to lower income housing. And I frankly would say I was a bit surprised at how much support there was among our neighbors. And many of them have echoed some of the points made in this discussion. One, that there is and there has been, and people are aware of the gentrification that's been going on in the city. And they are upset about it. And they strongly encourage the city to buy the property and maintain it, or I shouldn't say maintain it, but to convert it to lower income housing. I think we haven't been all that specific until more recently about what we think the numbers would be. But folks understand what we're talking about in terms of the demographics and the income ranges for the conversion. Folks are very interested in maintaining the green space. As Nick said, it's 16 acres, and folks would like to see that area continue as green space. They really strongly do not support converting it to another higher income building. We have plenty of those, as people realize in Ward 3. And also people understand that it is community that is rich in amenities. Not only do we have lots of public transportation, including the metro, lots of bus lines, but we also have a community in Woodley Park, toward the Cathedral Commons area, up towards Cleveland Park, et cetera, that could offer folks job opportunities. Certainly, many restaurants and other service organizations that would easily be amenable to adding to their workforce. So we've had a lot of support. We are circulating a petition online that people are eagerly signing. We've also asked people what they would like to see in addition to housing. And folks have talked about a community center for intergenerational activities. There's not a lot of senior citizen supports in the area. So folks have mentioned that. One of the only areas of concern for folks, and it's something we have in the Wardman Strategy Group thought about and spent a little bit of time working on, and that is the oversubscription to the Oyster School. We have worked, I think, assiduously with our architect to talk about some space that we could convert in the Wardman to any overflow at Oyster. We also have a colleague, I think Margaret Lenzer, I don't know if Margaret's on the call, who has made contact with Oyster principal. And we have, hopefully we'll have a continuing dialogue on this issue. So that's pretty much my report. We'll continue our efforts to get community support and to have folks sign the petition, continue to sign the petition.
Thank you, Deb. I want to make sure that everybody hears that we have a fuller presentation. It's already been set up for Wednesday, June 23rd, 6 to 7 p.m. And also on Saturday, June 25 at 11 o'clock in the morning. And we welcome you all. We hope your interest has been piqued here and that you'd be interested in asking questions or looking forward to our fuller presentation. Thank you.
That's great. And we will definitely send that out to the list. I want to commend all of you with your work. I know you've been extremely active, and I guess at the upcoming presentations, there may be some additional ways that people can support. Is there anything you want to mention now in addition to the petition and attending those meetings that people could do to support the effort?
I think one of the things I missed making this point, and I'm glad you brought it up, we are sort of definitely encouraging folks to send emails to members of the council, which we think is obviously very, very important, and to the mayor. And we've encouraged people to be on any one of the calls that the mayor has with the Woodley Park Association or any of the neighborhood associations, and to bring up the importance of converting the Wardman. And also that this is not a new concept. I mean, the communities and cities across the country are really supporting, the hotel conversions. It's not we're not the only city where this is occurring. It's pretty prominent, and it can and it should be done.
I must say, are there questions? It is really exciting to see the momentum build on this. At first, it was just a stone wall. We couldn't penetrate, but Che has indicated interest, and Gray and Bonds said she thought it was a dream project. And so we got a wonderful story column published by Janita Rose Barrett. And you look into these materials, but we hope we have piqued your interest in any case.
You have, definitely. Okay, wonderful. So we're going to move into a couple of announcements. And the first, I want to invite Paul Johnson to just announce and speak briefly about a surplus property issue in Ward 4. Let's see. Let me find you real quick, Paul. And
hi there. Hi, can you hear?
Yes, we can.
Great. Good afternoon. Sorry for being tardy, but I am an ANC in Ward 4 and 4C to be exact. And also a member of the Grassroots Planning Coalition, but there is an ongoing process with a public-owned, a district-owned asset called the Old Engine Company number 22 property, which is on the 5700 block of Georgia Avenue, just below Georgia and Missouri. It falls within CRC, but that little catchment area is a stone's throw from 4A and from 4D. And it is a major artery of Georgia Avenue. So in any case, the mayor and DEMPED have elected to undergo the surplus and disposition process. And the first step in that kicked off on Thursday, this past Thursday, a surplus hearing held by DEMPED. And there were some efforts from some grassroots community groups to disseminate the word about asking the community if there's still a remaining public use for this building and what the needs are in the community. So those ideas were offered at the surplus hearing. And I also wanted to say that although the hearing was on Thursday, the record still remains open for written comments up until the 24th. So I will include in the chat some of that information, but it's a wonderful opportunity to speak to whether or not there's a remaining public use of the asset for that building. And subsequent to that process, if there happens to be a development there, which a lot of talk has been there about, is what kind of terms and amenities are incorporated into that development if it should happen. Because what they are proposing would be a 300 unit development, which would only be second to the Walter Reed site, $100 million development right there on Georgia Avenue. And it would set the tone and the tenor for things to come going forward on Georgia Avenue. So I think we really need to be engaged in this and stay tuned for more to come on this. Thanks, President.
Thank you. And if anybody, there is sort of a budding Ward 4 committee forming. So if anybody's in Ward 4 wants to be included in the formation of that, we're modeling after the Ward 3 committee. I am going to just make a quick announcement here about upcoming events.
House payment and do it today.
Was there any other announcements? Reggie, go ahead.
Yes, hi everybody. Just want to let you know that on June 21st, the People for Fairness Coalition will be celebrating its 13th anniversary, and people are invited to come and celebrate with us and to, in some ways, pay respects to Ms. Rhonda and Mr. Walden.
Okay, is there any more information you want to put in the chat, or we can send it out as well, Reggie? And this is the event I wanted to make sure everybody knew about this Thursday. This is being moderated and led by Empower DC members who've been part of a racial equity cohort over the last 3 years. Brian McClure from the Council Office on Racial Equity, Dr. Amber Hewitt, the new Chief Equity Officer, and Kenya McDuffie will speak about implementation of the REACH Act, which is the legislation that established the core office and the Chief Equity Office. And we'll also be hearing from some of our members about their lived experience with racial inequity. I hope you can make it. Anybody else? Did I miss anybody else with an announcement? If so, you can call my attention to it real quick. Okay. All right, well, I think we accomplished what we were out to do. Thank you for being part of today's meeting, for being part of the Grassroots Planning Coalition. We are going to be doing a lot of planning coming up, so I hope that you will fill out the survey just to make sure that we hear your input and your ideas and know what you want to be involved in moving forward. And I welcome you to unmute and say goodbye to everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. I can resend out the Reach Act flyer as well. Yes, thank you.
Great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
Great
meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Everybody.
See ya.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Appreciate you. Have a good
Thank
weekend.
you.
Great work.
Great weekend.
Great meeting. Thank you. Thanks for all your work.
Great work, Carissa and team.
So much. Good to see you. Take care.
Bye.